It began with a sound no one could explain, like dragging chains across stone beneath the altar. The old women who cleaned the sanctuary said it happened only after midnight. The choir director insisted it was rats, but the gravedigger, he never said a word. For over 12 years, not a single grave on church property was ever reopened. Not for inspection, not for exhumation, not even when family begged. 12 years, 157 funerals, and not one body was ever verified. What kind of man wears a collar by day ... and buries empty boxes by night? The answer may still be locked inside the crumbling stone walls of St. Aurelius Church. Or worse, beneath it, they say, when the foundations were finally torn up during the 1991 renovation, workers found a second crypt. One that was never listed on the records. One filled with ... ropes, shackles, and clothes, but no remains. Who were the services really for? And if the church was never haunted, then who kept writing dates of death in the back of that leather-bound Bible before anyone was even reported missing? Asterisk. The town of Mournridge was barely a breath on the map, a gray smear of coal dust and memory tucked into the spine of the Appalachian Hills. Population 1,218, though that number hadn't changed in nearly 2 decades. Not because people stopped arriving, but because people quietly stopped being counted. Nestled on the edge of town stood St. Aurelius Church, built in 1873 by German immigrants and coal families. Its wooden cross leaned just slightly eastward, twisted, some said, by the wind. Others whispered it bent to listen to the graveyard it overlooked. Inside, the walls sweated with age. Candle smoke stained the arches like bruises. And in the center aisle, under the flickering light of gas chandeliers, walked the man they called Father Elijah Creed. He wasn't the first priest to serve Mournridge, but he was the longest. And by the time he arrived in 1965, the people were desperate for something steady. Mining accidents, illnesses, and factory layoffs had hollowed out the town's spirit. Hope clung to church bells and sermon verses. And Creed, well, he gave them just enough to keep believing. He was soft-spoken, carried a small leather journal everywhere, always remembered the names of children, even the sick ones who rarely left their beds. He visited the dying without hesitation, offering quiet prayers in dim bedrooms and burying the departed with solemn grace. But there was something about him, something that couldn't quite be explained. His house beside the chapel had no windows facing the street. No one was ever seen entering or leaving except Creed himself. And a bell never rang for weddings. Only funerals stopped by 1978. The cemetery behind the church had grown by 90 graves. There was no war, no epidemic, just a slow drip of quiet deaths, all signed off by the same man. Still, no one questioned it. Because Father Creed wrote the eulogies. He led the processions. He comforted the grieving. His words were like ash, on the tongue dry, but familiar. Then came the Merrill girl. Her name was Abigail, 16, bright. She played violin at Sunday services, always tucked away in the corner pew. One day, she simply didn't show up. They said she fell down the quarry. A tragic accident. The funeral was held within 48 hours. Closed casket. No autopsy. The grave was sealed before the parents could ask to see her one last time. After that, something changed in the town. Attention, like static behind every whispered conversation. Families stopped asking questions. Some started moving away. Those who stayed learned to speak carefully in public. And through it all, Father Creed never once took a day off. His sermons grew darker, less about salvation and more about silence, obedience, fear. He preached of fire, of punishment, of sins carved into the flesh. But still, the church remained full every Sunday. Because in places like Mournridge, people don't fight shadows. They pray under them. By the time 1982 came, another 42 funerals had taken place, all officiated by Creed. Most were elderly, the rest unfortunate accidents. A handful were teenagers, and every one of them was buried in a pine coffin, ordered from the same lumberyard, delivered after dark, and sealed before dawn. It wasn't until Father Creed disappeared that the silence finally cracked. On the night of July 3, 1983, he simply vanished. No note, no goodbye. The morning sun rose to find the church door still locked, but the sanctuary candles lit. And something else. On the altar, a single item, his leather journal. Its pages were soaked through, most of the ink unreadable, except for one line, burned into the final page in trembling script. They believed the house was God's, but I was always the only one inside. Asterisk. The disappearance of Father Elijah Creed should have brought closure. Instead, it cracked the surface of something far older and much deeper. At first, people tried to rationalize it. Maybe he fled, burned out, gone to join a monastery in silence, as some priests do when the world gets too loud. But the longer he remained gone, the stranger things became. It started with the Coffins. Sheriff Alan Beckley, pushed by the Merrill family and 2 others, finally approved limited exhumations. For peace of mind, he said, quietly, off the record. It was supposed to remain sealed information. The first grave opened was Abigail Merrow's. Her casket was empty, not decomposed, not damaged. Just filled with river stones and a folded wool blanket. The next 4 were worse. One contained rotted linens. Another, children's clothes with no bones. In one box, a shattered porcelain doll, dressed in a communion gown. No remains. No decay. No explanation. After the 6th coffin, the sheriff called everything off. Quiet threats followed. Documents vanished. The exhumation stopped, but rumors spread like blood through water. Old women stopped going to service. Young men began carrying pocket knives. Storefronts put up their own crosses in the windows, as if the church itself could no longer be trusted. People remembered things. Odd details. Creed was often seen walking behind the church, at dusk, into the woods that pressed close against the cemetery fence, always carrying something heavy, sometimes wrapped in cloth. There were strange sounds reported at night, low groaning from under the floorboards of the sanctuary. Some said it was the old plumbing. Others said it sounded like whispering. Janitor claimed he found claw marks on the inside of the confessional door. Not splinters, gouges. Like someone had been trapped inside. He quit the next day. Left town completely. Asterisk. Then came the discovery in the church's old storage cellar. When construction crews were hired in 1991 to restore St. Aurelius, now abandoned for nearly a decade, they broke open the sealed trapdoor in the back of the sacristy. What they found beneath was not a wine cellar. It was a room. Stone walls. No windows. Iron rings driven into the floor. One cot. One desk. Chains. And a thick black book. Not a Bible. A ledger. Handwritten in sharp, angular ink. Rows and rows of names. 157 in total. Next to each name, a date, a short phrase, and a symbol. Some kind of script, unreadable, etched in red across every page. The first entry was dated 1971. The last one? July 3rd, 1983. The day Creed vanished. At the bottom of that page, a single line scrawled in blood-colored ink. The flesh is temporary, but the silence is eternal. None of the names matched death records filed by the county. None of the funerals held in those 12 years could be verified by burial certificates. The only thread left was the journal Creed left behind. But by then, nearly half its pages were gone, torn, sunburned at the edges. Still, What remained hinted at something far more disturbing than murder. There were mentions of ascension through erasure, of soul binding below holy ground, and of hollowing the vessel before the ritual may begin. Scholars later claimed the language resembled a blend of early medieval Latin and occultist glossolalia. Others believed it was a personal code, one that no one had yet cracked. One psychologist, who reviewed the ledger, called it the ravings of a deeply ritualistic narcissist with delusions of divine purpose. Another simply closed the book after 20 minutes and said, whatever he believed it enough to keep doing it for 12 years. Asterisk, the cellar beneath St. Aurelius wasn't just a secret, it was a shrine, a place designed not for storage but for containment. And within its crumbling walls, the line between ritual and madness blurred into something even the experts couldn't explain. At the center of everything stood two objects: the ledger and Creed's partially ruined journal. The journal was water damaged, the ink bled across most pages, but forensics teams managed to recover entries using infrared scanning. What they found was not the confession they'd hoped for, no list of crimes, no reasoning, no apology. Instead, it read more like a ritual handbook, or worse, a doctrine. One entry dated April 4th, 1972 reads, "The flesh resists, but the silence welcomes. Only when the name is removed does the soul bend." The phrase "remove the name" appears again and again. Experts from the University of Virginia's religious anthropology department were brought in to interpret. Dr. Rachel Muniz, who specializes in fringe religious movements, said the entries resembled writings from 16th century heretical sex groups that believed in spiritual annihilation as salvation. In their view, death wasn't the end. Forgetting was it wasn't about killing, it was about erasing from the body, from records, from memory. Each of the 157 entries in the ledger followed the same pattern: a name, a date, and one of several recurring phrases. No shadow remains. Made whole through the quiet. Unseen, unfound, forgiven. But what disturbed investigators most were the symbols beside each entry. These weren't known occult markings or Latin sigils. Some resembled early Mesopotamian script. Others looked like distorted musical notations, as if the deaths were part of a larger, twisted composition. Handwriting analysts reviewed the ledger and confirmed something eerie. The earlier entries were neatly penned, but by the final pages, the writing grew more erratic, more aggressive, as if Creed had been writing in haste or in a trance. Several pages were ripped out entirely, but within the pages that remained, there were patterns, clues. One page listed Redwood, Room 3, second drawer, next to a name and date. It led authorities to the old rectory building beside the church. Behind a false panel in the drawer, they discovered a bundle of driver's licenses, each matched to one of the supposed victims, none of whom were officially declared missing, but they were all gone. No families, no paper trails. It was as if someone or something had gone back and scrubbed every part of their existence. Another clue came from the stained glass windows in the church. A local artist, Clarisse Duval, who helped restore them in 1970, recalled something odd, that Father Creed had replaced one panel himself, refusing to let anyone help. It was a panel showing the Archangel Michael casting Satan into hell. But under closer inspection, it wasn't Michael's face. It was Elijah Creed's, subtle, twisted in color, but unmistakably his. In the devil's place, a blank face. No features, just a shadow where the eyes should be. Clarisse had reported it at the time, but no one listened. They were told it was artistic liberty, metaphorical, they said. But now? Now it looked more like a warning, or a signature. The deeper investigators went, the more contradictions they uncovered. Why was there no record of Creed's seminary education? Why were all his church appointment letters typed on non-standard stationery, with no diocesan seal? Even his birth certificate, they found, was a facsimile, a copy of a document from a county that didn't exist. That was Elijah Creed, even his real name? Some believe the man was never ordained. Some believe he wasn't a man at all. Others still think it was all calculated. That Creed, or whoever he was, created a web so tight, so precise, that even in his disappearance, he controlled the story. What's certain is this: none of the 157 names in that ledger appear in church rosters, not in funeral records, not in obituaries, not in tax logs, phone books, or census data. As if they were never born. As if their deaths served a different purpose. And in the silence they left behind, Creed's voice still echoes. Asterisk reef is a wound. But what happens when there's no body? No proof, no closure, only absence. For the families in Copperhead Hollow, sorrow never had a shape. It was invisible. A slow-burning madness that hollowed people out from the inside. Take Judith Marrow. She buried her daughter Abigail in 1974. A sudden illness, they said. Closed casket. A gentle sermon. A small white coffin lowered into the ground with flowers and hymns. But when that coffin was opened 15 years later, and Abigail's name was found in the ledger, Judith stopped speaking altogether. Not a word. She sat on her porch for weeks, staring at the church bell tower. They say she lit candles every night and left her front door unlocked, as if her daughter might somehow walk back in. She died in 1992. Her autopsy report lists cardiac arrest. But her neighbor said Judith simply stopped being alive long before. Her heart gave out. She wasn't alone. Entire families left town after the investigation stalled. Others began to turn on each other. People whispered that maybe something new, and said nothing. That the quietest neighbors had become so good at not asking questions. They'd helped build the silence Creed needed. One man, Howard Lane, whose wife disappeared in 1980, was found digging in the woods behind the church. With his bare hands. His fingers were raw. His face was bloody. All he kept saying was, "She's still here. I can hear her." He didn't take her soul. Howard was institutionalized in Allentown in 1986. He never came back. Even children were affected. Students at the local school began drawing pictures of a man with no eyes. A tall figure in black robes, standing at the foot of their beds. One child, age 7, drew a map that eerily resembled the layout of the cellar beneath St. Aurelius, a place no child had ever been. Therapists called it mass suggestion. Locals called it residual fear. But one psychiatrist, Dr. Emil Grant, who visited Copperhead Hollow during the post-investigation period, had a different term for it: shared psychogenic grief. The kind that only happens when an entire community loses something it can't name. Because what was taken wasn't just people. It was memory. It was trust. Creed didn't just murder bodies. He murdered reality. By embedding himself in the sacred. By using the architecture of faith sermons, ritual, incense, burial rites, he convinced people they were safe. That the horror lived outside the walls of God's house. But the horror was the house. And once that knowledge took root, nothing in Copperhead Hollow felt real again. People questioned everything. How many more names? How many more churches? Was Creed a man, or just the first face of something older, wearing a priest's smile? In the years that followed, descendants of the victims filed lawsuits against the diocese. All were dismissed. Insufficient evidence. They were told, because there were no bodies. No murder weapons. No definitive crime. Just 157 names. And a silence so deep, it cracked the soul of the town. To this day, No new church has ever been built in Copperhead Hollow. The land is still. The birds avoid the steeple. No one speaks Creed's name aloud. But sometimes just before dusk, the locals say you can hear footsteps inside the ruined chapel. Heavy, measured, unhurried, like someone walking back and forth, waiting for another name to write. Asterisk. When authorities finally moved in on St. Aurelius in 1987, what they expected was a tragic case of negligence, maybe a hidden scandal, an illegal burial, something that could be explained with paperwork and a few arrests. What they found was nothing. No bodies, no blood, no physical evidence of murder. Just a locked cellar, a weathered ledger, and 157 empty coffins. The official investigation, led by State Detective Miriam Caldwell, went on for 18 months. Her team combed through every inch of the property. Interviews were conducted. Archive records were pulled from state libraries, seminary registries, even Vatican microfilm. Creed's paper trail ended in 1958. Before that, he simply didn't exist. No birth certificate. No school records. No prior church assignment. According to one federal agent, it was like trying to arrest a ghost. That didn't stop the theories. Theory 1. Creed as serial killer. The most accepted theory among law enforcement is that Elijah Creed was a calculating, psychopathic serial killer who used his role as a priest to access vulnerable people. His victims, mostly women, elderly, and drifters, were carefully chosen. He manipulated grieving families, staged fake deaths, and secretly disposed of the bodies somewhere never discovered. But if that's true, why go to such lengths to record their names? Why create a ritualized ledger with symbolic marks and repeated phrases? Serial killers don't preserve their victims' names. They collect trophies. Creed preserved memory as if it mattered to him. Theory 2. Insurance and identity fraud. A darker, more bureaucratic theory came from an investigative journalist. In 1991, that Creed was part of an underground identity trafficking ring. Asterisk. He faked deaths and burials to erase people on paper, then sold their identities to criminals, undocumented immigrants, or organizations needing clean slates. Some of the 157 names did, in fact, resurface years later in distant places, tied to small business licenses, land deeds, and bank accounts. But these sightings were fragmented and contradictory, never confirmed, and none of the individuals found ever responded to contact. Theory 3. The occult hypothesis, the most fringe but deeply unsettling theory, came from theologian turned occultist, Father Gabriel Nix, who examined the church ruins in 1995. According to Nix, the symbols in Creed's journal resembled angelic script, a form of mystic language used in Renaissance ceremonial magic to erase spiritual identities. He believed Creed was performing unmaking rituals, not killing bodies, but severing souls from history. This wasn't about murder, Nix wrote. It was about cosmic disappearance. Critics dismissed him as paranoid, but no one explained why none of the victims have ever been found, not even bones. One final investigation, quiet, classified, was conducted by a special division within the FBI in 1999. The files are sealed, but according to a leaked internal memo, the Bureau classified the St. Aurelius case as a non-terrestrial existential event. Whatever that means, the case remains officially unsolved. Creed has never been seen again, but those who lived through it say justice is the wrong goal, because justice belongs to the living, and no one from that church has ever truly lived again. Asterisk. Some stories end. Most don't. They rot slowly in silence. Like wood eaten from within. It's been decades since Elijah Creed vanished. The church is gone, now burned in a controlled demolition. The land is fenced off, but nothing grows there. Not grass, not weeds, not even moss on the stones. They say it's cursed. They say it's empty. The locals say otherwise, because on certain nights, when the wind comes in wrong, the sound of a bell can still be heard. No one installed it. No one's seen it, but it rings, always at the same time. 3:12 a.m. Some think it's coincidence. Some say it's the hour Creed wrote his final entry. One word: absolvo. I absolve. But absolution requires confession. And Creed never confessed. The 157 victims remain unaccounted for. Not buried. Not burned. Not reclaimed. The ledger still exists. Locked away in a museum basement. Sealed under court order. And yet, every 2 years, someone adds a name. No one knows who. No cameras ever catch it, but the writing is identical. Same ink, same slant, same final mark. It's as if Creed never left. Or was never one person at all. What if he wasn't a man? What if Elijah Creed was a pattern, a ritual, a role, passed down like a stolen robe, worn by those who understand how faith blinds? That's the part that unsettles people the most. Not that someone could kill for 12 years inside a church, but that the very structure of community, of trust, of religion could be used, twisted, weaponized, and no one noticed. Think about that. 157 families attended Sunday service. They prayed. They tithed. They buried their loved ones under hymns. They never suspected a thing. And now, what? About your church? Your community? How well do you really know the person who stands behind the pulpit? How sure are you that the hands offering you grace aren't the same ones that close the coffin? Maybe there's a ledger in your town, too. Maybe it's not 157 names. Maybe it's only one, but it only takes one to vanish before we realize how easy it is to bury someone without ever digging a grave. Because the most terrifying truth is this: Elijah Creed never killed to hide his crime. He killed because no one ever thought to look.